now like to introduce our next speaker, Jessie Wright. Jessie is humbled to serve as the Junior League of Phoenix's first Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Because again, this is a new team this year. She believes that our community needs sustainable source of smart, strong, and diverse leaders, and she's happy to work to build and strengthen a future that encourages and supports others to push themselves out of their comfort zone. In addition to her work with the JLP, she's a member of the YNPN Phoenix Board, a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and is Inclusion, Diversity, Engagement, and Access Committee, and she's a volunteer with Make-A-Wish Arizona. Welcome, Jessie.
So much, Jill. I'm really happy to be here with all of y'all this afternoon to talk just briefly a little bit more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also want to thank Katie so much for bringing up hybrid meetings as part of the diversity and equity and inclusion work that we're doing. Because if you remember from the last time I was here, if you were here in the last new leader training, DEI is everybody's responsibility. It's not just mine. It's not just my committees. It's everybody's. So, and that training, I also mentioned two things to just start with. If you are nervous about starting in the DEI world, ask yourself two questions. One, is this inclusive? And is there a perspective that I might have missed or I might be missing? So this time we're going to be talking about trust. Ooh, trust, big words. So trust is vital to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. We know that our members in the league have the most interaction with their committees. So chairs and other leaders in the league have a really big responsibility to keep all of the women in our league feeling engaged and feeling included in their league experience. So all that to say, part of your role as a league leader is to build trust with your teams and then rebuild the trust if it's broken. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. For today, I'm going to be heavily referencing the work of Harvard professors Frances Frye and Annie Morris. These two women have written extensively on trust building within organizations, and they're phenomenal. When I'm done talking, I'll give Kristen the links to two of their pieces so you can have my references like a true, we're excited page. We can go to the next slide. So trust is one of the most fundamental pieces of any relationship that we have, right? We trust people, companies, organizations, we trust the people that we vote for, and trust is one of the most basic and valuable resources that we have as leaders. Building trust requires us to think about leadership from maybe a different perspective than like traditional leadership. So a traditional leadership narrative is all about you, right? It's your vision. It's the way that you motivate your team to meet the goals. It's how you and your brilliance can save the day when disaster strikes. It's your responsibility to fix things. It's your responsibility, period. And it's your power. We're going to throw this traditional definition of leadership out the window, and we're going to center trust building. So when we center trust building, leadership becomes about empowering other people as a result of your presence, and it becomes about making that impact of your leadership continuous even when you're not there. All right, we can go to the next slide. So if you were in our last new leader training, you'll remember that we talked a little bit about superpowers, and we talked about our superpowers. So your job as a leader is to not only understand your own superpowers, but also to help to create conditions for your team to bring out their superpowers and then bring them into the game. This is part of inclusion. Inclusion. So cool. How do we do that? This is a volunteer organization. I don't really have all day to do this. Enter the trust triangle. Brian Morris developed the trust triangle, and it shows us that trust is made up of 3 points. They call them drivers. So there's authenticity. That's when people believe that they're interacting with the real you. There's logic. That's when people have faith that you know what you're talking about. You're competent. Your judgment is sound. And then there's empathy, right? They feel like you care about them. To build trust, it's important to figure out which of these points you're maybe a little wobbly on. So let's do an experiment. We can go to the next slide. Think about a time when you weren't as trusted as you hoped you would be. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to really think about this because it's important for the rest of the presentation. Should have a little bit of hold music to think about this time. All right, I'm going to assume maybe you all have thought about this. I thought about mine in like 4 seconds. I don't know what that says about me. So now I want you to take that situation and I want you to do something that's hard. Think about it from another person's point of view. So Fry and Morris call this other person the skeptic, and they're the person who says that you broke trust, right? So I want you to do something that's even harder than just thinking about things from their perspective and like assume that maybe the skeptic is right and you actually were responsible for this like trust breakdown. You really have to own this lack of trust for this next part to work. So you're going to be a little vulnerable. That's okay. Maybe it's not going to feel great. That's also okay. We're all here together to feel really uncomfortable together. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about this position from the skeptic's perspective, and they're right. Okay. Does that make sense? Some nodding from people I can see on screens. Cool. All right. Think. I wish I had some hold music. Okay, great. I'm trusting that you've all done this because that's what we're talking about, trust. So if you can identify this one scenario, you can identify this for multiple scenarios. And then you might be able to identify some kind of a pattern on a wobble. Then you can think about, how does my wobble shift? Does it shift when there are power dynamics present? What about when my stress is high? So in the scenario that you thought about, did your skeptic feel like you were misrepresenting some part of yourself or the story? If that was the case, that can be identified as an authenticity problem. If your skeptic thought that you were putting your own interests first, that's an empathy problem. And if your skeptic was questioning your, academic rigor or your analysis or your ability to execute on something, that's a logic problem. So with all of those things in mind, I want to launch a poll to help us understand like where we're all feeling a little wobbly. So I feel the most wobbly on authenticity, logic, empathy, help, all of them, or I'm not feeling wobbly. There are no wrong answers.
We have about a third of the votes are in.
All right.
About half of the group has voted.
Vote away, friends.
2/3. Come on, ladies. There's still time.
You can vote.
Your vote matters.
Participation is key, guys.
About 80%. A few of you are still, I think a few people might still be debating. They're trying to figure out which problem it was. So we're getting the last few votes in now.
It requires a lot to think.
Okay. Oh, nope. There's still a few more. See, people are still thinking.
See? Think away, ladies. I mean, I do only have 12 minutes for this presentation, so, wrap it up a little bit.
Okay, I think they've thought about it, and here we go. Let me share the results.
All right. Wow. I'm glad no one said help. Help all of them. And I want to be this 20% who doesn't feel wobbly. After learning more about these wobbles, I'm an empathy wobbler, which really shocked me, but we'll get to that later. So when we take responsibility for our wobbles, we're revealing our humanity and our analytical skills. So that covers our authenticity and our logic. And then we're doing this all while communicating our commitment to our relationships, which covers empathy. So we can go to the next slide and talk about this big word, authenticity, that really gets thrown around a lot. It's kind of like a lot of words that we use lately, I feel like. So in Fry and Morris's research, authenticity tends to be one of the most challenging of the 3 drivers. And there are tons of reasons why that is. And I can't go into all of them, but you can read about them in my my works cited page that you'll get later. So we can go to the next slide. We're going to go with this definition: a full and complete accounting of what you know, think, and feel. So here's a quick test for you. How different is your professional persona from the one that shows up around your family and friends? Sometimes this makes me want to throw up when I think about it. If there's a sharp difference, you might be getting something in return for kind of masking or minimizing certain parts of yourself, but what's the payoff, right? So there's usually a payoff in this kind of thing. And now think about how different is your real life persona from your league persona? Ooh. It's important to note and really take to heart that not everyone actually feels safe enough to show up as their authentic self in all spaces. And there's an arm's length, whole body circle around the world 12 times list of reasons why that is. It's also in a lot of the research. So if this doesn't sound like inclusion, you might need to be reminded about the definition of inclusion, which is the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel empowered and welcomed, valued, supported to fully participate. An inclusive and welcoming climate embraces differences. Oh my gosh, I only have 1 minute left. Sorry, I'm panicked. Okay. We'll go to the next slide so we can talk really quick about important things. Sherry, this is terrible. Okay. When you have a logic wobble, guys, here's the thing. It turns out you're not actually wrong. You know what you're talking about like a lot of the time. You have really sound evidence. What you actually have is a communication problem. And people kind of communicate really complex things in two ways. There's the like storytelling way, which goes in, how I talk a lot in spirals. We're taking a listener through a lovely, mysterious journey. We go through this whole beautiful story. And then at the end, it's like the point, right? And then we can use that journalism's inverted pyramid to help with wobbly logic. So in this version, you get to the point, you get there really fast, and then you kind of can fill that out. This demonstrates clarity of vision. It helps people follow your logic a little more easily. And then if you get interrupted, which I don't know if y'all get interrupted a lot, but I get interrupted a lot, and it's usually not by another woman in most cases. It really has served me so far to do this inverted pyramid. Can I go ahead, Sherry? I'm panicked. Okay. All right, let's go talk about empathy. My wobble. Maybe my wobble is logic. Okay, so empathy is actually the most common wobble. So this is especially true for like high achievers. So, I'm imagining I'm not the only empathy wobbler in here. So high achievers typically get impatient when they are maybe not around similarly motivated people or people who take a little bit longer to understand something. Empathy wobblers might consider paying very close attention to the way that they behave in groups, and especially when somebody else is speaking. If you wobble on empathy, you might find yourself very, very engaged at the beginning of a meeting. And then you might kind of, hear what you need to hear. And then you start zoning out. You're multitasking, checking emails, looking at your phone, making a grocery list. If you're showing up in that way, you're showing people that they don't matter. So why would they trust you? Ooh. A fix for empathy wobblers could be this. Instead of focusing on what you need from the meeting, work to ensure that everyone else gets what they're needing. And if nothing else, put your phone away during meetings. Ooh, hard. Okay. So DEI work cannot happen without trust. And we have to be really intentional about leadership that promotes inclusion in a very active way. You can go to the next slide. If we want women in the league to bring their full and authentic selves into our league, we have to bring our full and authentic selves into the league. So let your light shine, right? And encourage your teams to do the same. We all need to take responsibility for making sure that our members can show up authentically. We need to be intentionally managing for inclusion. That means hearing from everyone and inviting different perspectives and appreciating those differences. So when you're leading a meeting, you might ask yourself, have I really heard from everyone on my team? And if not, do what you can to make sure that you do hear from everyone. You could say something like, hey, Vivian, I really haven't heard from you on this issue. Can you share your perspective? Or Allie, can you make sure that we're not missing anything around this issue? Do you see a different perspective or a different way that we could look at this? And then we can all learn and grow and then become stronger when we're really intentional about inclusion. And finally, you got to trust yourself, right? To be a truly empowered leader, it's good to know where you stand and where your strengths are. So where are you wobbling? When do you wobble? And it's important to be mindful of your relationship with others, yes. And it's very important to understand your relationship with yourself too. Where might you have biases? Where does your expertise end? That one's kind of hard for me sometimes. Where do you need to ask for help? And just be honest, because after all, if you can't trust yourself, why should anybody else trust you? Finally, I'm obsessed with this quote from the HLI CEO. I love it so much. I've written it on the outside of my notebook. Diversity is the fact, inclusion is the action, belonging is the outcome. And when we create a space that values diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to do that with trust in mind. That is all I have. Hearts and flowers. Thanks for letting me go over, Sherry.
Thanks so much, Jessie. That was wonderful. And I look forward to seeing your committee, your team's output this year and future trainings.